Dade Phelan is out, and a bruising battle for Speaker of the Texas House is set to begin. Unless it's already over? That story and more today on The Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. Big drama at the Texas Capitol. With a surprise announcement late Saturday, a Lubbock representative claims to have enough bipartisan votes to become the next Speaker of the House. Is that for real? And what does a House Speaker do anyway? An historic event in the Mideast as Syria's Assad regime is toppled by rebels. A top Texas-based expert weighs in. Has Texas oil toppled Saudi control of the markets? Also, medical treatments for trans minors banned under state law, why some trans adults say they're affected too. All that and more today coming up. The Speaker's race is over. The Speaker's race is over? On this Monday, December 9th, no matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown, and let's face it, each year the holidays seem to arrive earlier and earlier than expected. When the HOA strings up those first lights at the end of September, you can almost hear the eyes rolling. But this, well, this is on a whole nother level. In this case, we're referring to a looming battle royale in a legislative session that's not supposed to get started until mid-January. And already we have a self-declared victor for the soon-to-be-open position of House Speaker. Let's get you up to speed. On Friday morning, the current Republican Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan of Beaumont, announced he would not be seeking another term. That sent out big ripples felt on the pages of the New York Times. That's how big a deal it was. Phelan was facing what was expected to be a bruising battle for the speakership led by fellow Republicans to his right, upset with what they perceived to be Phelan's willingness to give in too much to Texas Democrats. Well, if not Phelan, then who? This weekend, the House GOP caucus backed David Cook of Mansfield, and under caucus rules, GOP members are supposed to stick with the caucus's choice. But then a funny thing happened on Saturday evening when another Republican, Representative Dustin Burrows of Lubbock, unilaterally declared it was game over, that he, not Cook, had the necessary votes to become the next Speaker of the Texas House, including support from Texas Democrats and some Republicans willing to break GOP caucus rules. For his part, Cook doesn't appear to be conceding. So why all this sound and fury over the Texas speakership? What does a speaker even do anyway? Here to tell us more, Jess Huff, who reports for the Texas Tribune. Jess, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Let's begin with this position, which frankly I thought was rather administrative. What does a House Speaker do?
Well, really, they decide sort of the flow of legislation, and that gives them a lot of power. So it's more than just deciding when a bill is heard by the rest of the legislature. It's also what bills get heard and when. And so while the position was originally largely administrative, over the last few decades, it has developed into something more significantly powerful and is a way for party leaders to push across agendas.
So in a sense, if you are the Speaker of the House, you can kind of decide what gets passed, what doesn't get heard in the first place. You become a kind of gatekeeper, and so you wield a lot of influence, similar to what I guess the lieutenant governor has in the Senate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're very similar in that way, although I think from what I understood with my interview with Professor Rottinghouse, the lieutenant governor has always been seen as a position of holding that kind of power. And it's, like I said, it's just been in the last few decades that we've seen the speakership begin to hold that.
Brandon Rottinghouse of, I believe it's University of Houston, if I'm not mistaken, a terrific scholar of Texas politics. Well, now, is the race for Speaker always as contentious as it seems to be right now? I mean, this is playing out in the open. It's not like this is happening behind closed doors. This is warts and all for everyone to see. Absolutely.
And I think that is what makes this race in particular unique, is that it is out in the open. There might have been infighting in years past, but it was typically solved behind closed doors. But the politics have played out over the last few years quite openly. So that does make this speaker's race largely unique. I think a lot of people are curious to see how this impacts the Republican Party moving forward.
Well, how does it? I mean, if you're listening to this, to us talking right now, you may be thinking, well, this is interesting sort of on that meta level, but how is this going to affect what laws ultimately get passed as a practical matter? In other words, if the far right, I should say, of the Republican Party ends up winning the day, how's that going to be different in a practical sense from, say, if someone who is more to the center were to win?
This basically establishes a sign of disunity, a sign of weakness within the Republican Party. So Democrats can drag their feet. They have a little bit more sway that way. And that can just slow down the entire process of lawmaking this legislative session. So it'll be curious to see, how Republicans solve the issue of unity, because if they do have a split caucus on who to vote for, then it does open them up to having legislation that they want passed stymied or slowed.
I'm thinking more specific issues. I mean, I know that the governor was really disappointed with Dade Phelan because he wasn't able to pass that voucher-like plan for schools. So right. Is this likely to be decisive?
I think that a lot of that is to be seen moving forward. From what I understand from Professor Rottinghouse, it could very well impact that. But I think that it's something we're going to have to see and whether Republicans can rally.
Is there a risk for Republicans they can't form a consensus around a speaker before the session starts?
I mean, if we look at this logically, if they can't form a consensus, then this opens up the possibility for another candidate to come in, maybe a more moderate Republican or somebody that nobody's really thought of. And that could also slow the process of lawmaking down as well. So this opens up what seems like a can of worms as far as how this legislative session is actually going to run.
Jess Huff reports on East Texas for the Texas Tribune. Jess, we're going to have a link to your reporting at texasstandard.org, and thanks again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I'm Laura Rice. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has mobilized thousands of National Guard troops to the southern border over the past 3 years. The mission, known as Operation Lone Star, is intended to deter illegal migration. But the mobilization has taken a toll on some soldiers. At least 17 Texas National Guardsmen have died during the border mission, many by suicide. Gabriella Alcorta Solorio reports for the American Homefront Project.
Every month, about a dozen residents of Eagle Pass, Texas, come to this spot on the Rio Grande to pay tribute to those who have lost their lives trying to cross.
Dear Heavenly Father, we come together to pray for those who have passed on and their families, Lord. We ask that your Holy Spirit be in the hearts and minds of all the folks that are dealing with the situation here on our border.
These vigils usually memorialize migrants, but this one also pay tribute to another group.
Even though we focus on the immigrants, but we also understand the pressure that the National Guard people are going through, because it's not easy to see people drown.
Pastor Javier Yeva spoke next to the Eagle Pass boat ramp, where Bishop Evans, a 22-year-old National Guardsman, drowned trying to save 2 migrants. Evans is among at least 17 troops who have died while mobilized to Operation Lone Star. The deaths include at least 7 suicides, 2 accidental shootings, and 2 motor vehicle accidents. The Texas Military Department would not answer our questions about the deaths or the conditions of the deployment, but several Guard members agreed to talk. We're withholding their names and distorting their voices because they fear retaliation. This soldier knew Bishop Evans.
That one hurt because he was well liked by a lot of the guys that I was on a Cooper mission with him. So a lot of the guys got really down from that. Losing someone, it's never good news.
Another soldier witnessed the death of 19-year-old Dejon Towns, who died in an accidental shooting with his own personal firearm.
When we requested that we stop training because someone had died from a event that was not even supposed to have guns, we were told to shut the up, sit there, and keep doing your job as if nothing happened.
In a statement regarding the deaths, Governor Abbott's office commended the Guardsmen for protecting the country from what it called the consequences of the Biden-Harris administration's dangerous open borders policy. The statement also said Abbott was proud to sign a law called the Bishop Evans Act that provides families of dead National Guardsmen a one-time payment of $500,000. But the military department told state lawmakers that of the 17 deaths, 10 claims were filed before the act was passed, while 6 were denied and deemed not mission-related. Texas Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro has fought Operation Lone Star since its launch.
It's devastating to hear that there have been 17 deaths, several of them suicides, soldiers that are part of Operation Lone Star, because Governor Abbott set this whole thing up as a show horse.
Suicide is a leading cause of death among service members as a whole, but some observers say the nature of the border mission can especially affect soldiers' mental health. Ari Sawyer, formerly with Human Rights Watch, is an expert in immigration policy.
The only way to stop these suicides is to stop forcing them to carry out these violent policies against their fellow human beings.
President-elect Trump says he plans to use the military to carry out mass deportations and secure the border. Sawyer says Operation Lone Star has shown one of the risks of that.
To the extent that the military is tasked with immigration enforcement in the United States, we will see more and more suicides, especially because the country is really polarized on this issue. And so there's a sense of rejection and isolation.
The guardsman who witnessed DeJohn Towns' shooting says he felt ostracized because he spoke out about how troops were treated. He eventually left Operation Lone Star after experiencing depression and PTSD.
No matter how hard I tried, it was never enough.
Because he was deployed on state orders, he did not receive disability benefits, and his conditions were deemed not service-connected. He once wanted to make the military a career, but says Operation Lone Star changed his mind. I'm Gabriella Alcorta Solorio in San Antonio.
The Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24 hours. The number to call is 988. This story was produced by the American Homefront Project, a public media collaboration that reports on American military life and veterans.
Wells Dunbar is the Texas Standard social media editor, and he's been monitoring what Texans are talking about online. Wells, welcome back.
Hi, David. Returning to the story at the top of the show, the Republican infighting in the race for Texas House Speaker. As you described, dramatic scenes over the weekend as Representative Dustin Burrows claimed to have the necessary amount of votes just minutes after Representative David Cook won the endorsement of the Texas House GOP caucus. Well, who will lock down the 76 votes needed to lead the lower chamber? It remains to be seen. But over on r/Texas, one Redditor writes, certainly the most dramatic speaker race in a while. I'm eager to see what it looks like when the dust settles. They also note the stakes for Republicans to buck the party line. Getting primaried is a material threat after the last election, with the anti-voucher Republicans getting decimated. Just one perspective out there, David. I'll be back with more later in the program.
Wells Dunbar is our social media editor, and he'll be joining us again in about 35 minutes. Keep those comments coming. Look for Texas Standard on your social media platform of choice. An historic change in the Middle East and the end of a long-running family dictatorship. What's next for Syria, and how did the overthrow happen so fast? We'll be talking with one of Texas's top global political experts as the Standard continues.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the Texas College Savings Plan, administered by the state of Texas. Families can save for tuition, room and board, books, and other qualified education expenses at eligible schools nationwide. Learn more at texascollegesavings.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. On Sunday afternoon, the first ever 12-team college football playoff bracket was set, and two teams representing the Lone Star State have a shot at a national title. The first team is the University of Texas, whose only two losses this season were to number 2 ranked Georgia. The Longhorns first lost to them back in October and again this past Saturday for the SEC championship title. The second Texas school headed to the college football playoffs is Southern Methodist University, which finished this season with an 11-2 record. This is the first time the SMU Mustangs have made the college football playoffs, and they were able to take one of the final remaining spots from Alabama. The college football playoffs kick off on December 20th, and you can bet we'll be following it all here at the Texas Standard.
Support for Coverage of Business comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' comp carrier dedicated to handling claims proactively to help injured employees get back on the job and policyholders get back to business. More at texasmutual.com/claims.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Amid the holiday shuffle, you might have missed it, though in terms of historic scale, it's a little hard to recall anything quite this big happening this quickly. So quickly, in fact, it's not at all clear what comes next. A bit of backstory. Shortly before he died in the year 2000, Syria's long-standing dictator Hafez al-Assad handed the reins to his son, Bashar, who governed Syria as a totalitarian police state with allies including Iran and Russia's Vladimir Putin. But in recent days, a coalition of Syrian rebels arose with a lightning strike of military offensives against the Assad regime, culminating in something that was almost previously unthinkable, the sudden fall of the House of Assad. Now, what for Syria, an historic adversary of Israel? Jeremy Suri is the Mac Brown Distinguished Professor for Global Leadership, History, and Public Policy at the LBJ School, and he's also in the History Department, University of Texas at Austin. Professor Suri, welcome back.
Nice to be with you, David.
Good to be with you. Bashar al-Assad had faced uprisings before, each of them brutally quashed with overwhelming military force or extending into a long-running stalemate. Why was the outcome so decisive and so different here?
Well, we have to say that this outcome has surprised pretty much everyone. I'm sure Assad among those. And I think there are three factors that really led to this moment. First is the corruption and stagnation of Assad's army. For many years, he had used a large army to defend his regime against the civil war, against rebels. Yes. And over time, this regime became more and more corrupt. And there were more and more reports of military leaders stealing equipment, not training their soldiers. So there was just the decline of the institution. Second, Assad's main supporters were Russia, Iran, and to some extent Hezbollah. And Russia is preoccupied in Ukraine. Iran is preoccupied in its conflict with Israel, as is Hezbollah. And then I think the third element of this is simply that there has been a trend all year, and this is one element of that, of large numbers of people in various societies coming out either at the voting booth or in the streets against incumbent rulers. There is anger and frustration around the world. And as a historian, we have these moments in history when regimes across the world are unstable and attacked by their own people. And this is one of those moments.
These rebels who overthrew Assad have been characterized as a coalition. Who are they?
They are a mix of Islamist and Kurdish groups. The leading rebel group is known as HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and they are a mix of groups, some of which had ties to al-Qaeda and ISIS, which are obviously things that concern the United States. They have been fighting against Assad for, in many ways, more than a decade, and many of these groups don't like each other, but they have come together for the purpose of overthrowing the regime. The question is whether they will continue to cooperate now that the regime is gone.
It's hard not to think of this in larger geopolitical terms, though, right? I mean, Syria, as you mentioned, had been serving as a kind of almost an arsenal for enemies of Israel, Hezbollah most notably. Russia, a key ally, has had its hands full with Ukraine. And in the U.S., of course, the president-elect has promised disengagement from what his team has described as unwinnable forever wars. Anything behind the timing of all of this?
Well, I do think with so many regimes changing around the world and so much instability, particularly in the Middle East, I do think there's a direct connection here. The most direct connection is to what's happening in Israel. I think the weakening of Hezbollah and the preoccupation now of Iran with a direct conflict now with Israel, that certainly weakened Assad's regime. And in that context, that gave the rebels an opening they had now, which they did not have even a year ago.
Yeah, but, overthrowing a government is no small matter, especially one so entrenched as Assad. You need arms, you need equipment, to say nothing of intelligence, right, coordination. Do you see the invisible hand of either the U.S. or Israel here?
I don't in this situation right now. I think Israel and the United States were as surprised, our intelligence agencies and others, as anyone else was. You could argue that over the last 15 years, it has been the United States in particular that has used its influence in the region to try to keep these rebel forces armed and able to operate. Many of them have had connections to U.S. forces in Iraq and U.S. interests in Jordan. And to some extent, perhaps the Israelis have been doing that. So yes, I think that's a reason why the rebel forces have existed and survived as long as they have. But it does not explain, outside intervention does not explain the collapse. That's really what this is. The collapse of what we should recognize is a government that's been in power for 50 years, if we consider Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, as well as Bashar al-Assad.
Well, who are the allies of what would be a new government in Syria? And especially you think about how many different coalitions, how many different forces make up this coalition, I should say. And I wonder what this means, as you see it, for the region writ large.
Well, it's very hard to know where this government is going. Everyone is asking that question now. That's the question that's at the center of every foreign policy maker around the world. The person who claims leadership of this coalition right now is a man named Abu Muhammad al-Jalwani. He used to be an al-Qaeda member himself, but he has now renounced al-Qaeda. He has explicitly called for pluralism. That's the word he's used in Syria. He claims he's going to try to build a coalition government. There is no history of that, at least in the last 50 years. In this region, it has been ruled by a minority, an Alawite minority of the Assad family. So it's hard to imagine this happening in a smooth way. But so far, at least the language and the claims of the new rebel forces have been positive, and they have reached out to the United States and to other countries in the region. I don't know if they've reached out to Israel. So it's hard. It's hard to know. Certainly for the region, what this means now is that you have another source of instability. And the incoming Trump administration, David, might say it's not interested in the Middle East. But as often happens for new governments, they are learning very quickly the Middle East is interested in them.
Yeah. You mentioned the Syrian military earlier. Will the rebels control what's left of that military? Do the Syrian people seem to support this overthrow from what you can tell?
From what we can tell, there has been positive reception of soldiers from the rebel groups when they've entered Aleppo, Homs, and now Damascus, the capital. But of course, the people who are favorable are the ones who come out in the street. We don't have any real polling. We don't really know. Yeah. Most Syrians are probably just waiting to see. Most of the existing Syrian government military has collapsed. Those weapons are still there in the country. But I think the institution of the Syrian military is now dissolved. And the question will be, do the former fighters in the Syrian government military, do they join the rebel forces or not? We don't know the answer to that question yet. That's one of many uncertainties.
Jeremy Suri, author and global politics expert at UT and UT's LBJ School. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, David.
Support for Texas Standard comes from TCU, exploring renewable and sustainable energy sources to power a clean energy future. Stories of research at endeavors.tcu.edu.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Alexandra Hart. Republicans in the Texas State House aren't seeing eye to eye on who they want to be the next speaker. Most want a more conservative person in the leadership role, while those who are more moderate are looking to side with Democrats to elect their own choice. The Texas Newsroom's Blaise Gainey explains what's at stake for the House members and the state.
During this last election, conservative Republicans in Texas beat out some moderate incumbents, winning control of the state House. Now they want to elect one of their own to be the Speaker of the House, Representative David Cook. They have the numbers, but their more moderate opponent, Representative Dustin Burrows, can win with majority Democrat support. Allison Craig, an assistant professor at the University of Texas, predicts what would happen in that situation.
If you were dependent upon Democratic votes to get the Speaker's chair, then assuming that you are then also dependent upon them to maintain it.
Texas GOP rules say Republicans must vote for the endorsed candidate by the majority of the caucus. The official vote for Speaker is in January. In Austin, I'm Blaise Gainey.
A suspect is in custody accused of killing a police officer on I-20 east of Dallas last night. Officer Jacob Candenoza with the Terrell Police Department was making a traffic stop when citizens began reporting a shooting. Lieutenant Mary Hager is with the Terrell Police Department.
We started receiving 911 calls in the 911 center saying that officer had been shot. A citizen had used his radio, stated the same information that an officer had been shot.
Police were able to locate the vehicle and arrest a man after a chase. More than 600 current and former residents and employees of 2 nursing homes in the Rio Grande Valley may have been exposed to tuberculosis. The Cameron County Public Health Department is working with 2 nursing homes in Harlingen and conducting TB testing today. In addition to RSV, flu, and COVID, cases of whooping cough are on the rise. Dr. Ravi Guru, medical director at Memorial Hermann Go Health Urgent Care, explains how they're tracking the progression of these diseases.
We are getting into flu season right now, so we're seeing those flu numbers pick up. But as far as RSV and COVID, it's very hard to predict those. But we do actively monitor all three, RSV, flu, and COVID cases to assess. So it's something we keep on our radar on a regular basis.
Dr. Guru reminds people to be up to date on their vaccines. He also says if you or your child or elderly family member have a virus and it's not clearing up after a few days, head to an urgent care facility. I'm Alexandra Hart from the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Raise Your Hand Texas, working to strengthen public education for all students and helping Texans understand education issues coming up during the 89th legislative session at raiseyourhandtexas.org.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm Laura Rice. Is Saudi Arabia losing its grip on the oil market? The kingdom, a founding member of OPEC, has aimed to keep oil prices elevated, but it's struggled to keep oil production of allied countries in check, and a new U.S. administration could shake things up even further. For more on why and what it means for the market, we turn once again to Matt Smith, energy analyst for Kepler. Matt, welcome back.
Thank you, Laura.
So why has OPEC Plus been unable to unwind production cuts?
Well, it's been a number of factors. So we have seen U.S. production climbing. The U.S. actually is the largest oil producer in the world now by quite a margin. So the U.S. produces 13.5 million barrels a day, while Saudi Arabia and Russia are only around 9 million barrels a day now, as they're trying to keep that production reined in to support prices. But it's also supply growth from other non-OPEC countries, which has really kind of boosted total supplies here. So we've seen increasing production from Canada, Brazil, Guyana, and Norway. But at the same time, Laura, demand growth is slowing on a global basis. So we are still consuming more oil year after year, but the pace of that growth is slowing. So in a nutshell, you've had OPEC, which is trying to support prices, has taken oil off the market. And then because of this slowing demand growth and then supplies increasing from elsewhere, they essentially have been backed into a corner and don't have any room for them to put oil onto the market.
Well, you mentioned U.S. oil production and just how much we're pumping out. I seem to remember that, one of President-elect Trump's talking points was drill, baby, drill, and to increase production. So how does this tie into what the new administration might do?
Well, one key nomination that's been made is for Treasury Secretary with Scott Bessent. And so he's got a key goal here. It's called the 3-3-3 plan. And so he's looking to cut the budget deficit to 3% of GDP by 2028. It's currently about 6.5%. So essentially mean that the US spends less and takes, enough taxes to cause us not to have such a large deficit. The second three stands for GDP growth, so economic growth. We're already around 2.8%, so we're close to that. But the third one is the most important one for our conversation here. The third three is he's looking to get an extra 3 million barrels a day of oil production in the US. Now, the devil is in the details here because that's barrel of oil equivalent. So that includes natural gas and natural gas liquids such as propane. And so, yes, we could see that possibly achieved, but it would be including natural gas as well as oil, as well as propane and butane, all those other things.
Now, I have had enough conversations with you, Matt, that I know that these things come down to the basic supply and demand. So where does this leave us for going into next year? What are the key themes for demand and supply, and what's expected for oil prices?
Well, Laura, on the demand side of the picture, this year China has really struggled. We've got used to seeing really strong growth and really strong demand growth for oil out of them, and that has really hit the brakes this year. That theme is going to continue next year as well. So that will really weigh on that oil demand growth side of the picture. On the supply side, the US is going to increase production a bit, maybe 300,000-400,000 barrels a day on average year on year. And then we've got Brazil, Canada, and Norway should also help. So where this leaves us, it kind of around the $70 for WTI, that US benchmark, which really, Laura, is actually a sweet spot for prices because it's high enough to encourage US producers to keep producing and turning a profit, while prices are low enough to keep prices at the pump in check. So as long as gasoline prices around sort of $3.50 a gallon on the national average, consumers won't be complaining. And that's kind of where we should be with that oil price.
One last question. I wonder,
Sure.
there's recent developments in Syria that have really escalated,
Yes.
and that's impacted Iran at the same time. How does
Yeah.
all of that complicate things?
Well, in terms of it is causing oil prices to rally a bit, not because Syria is a large oil producer, it isn't, but because the uncertainty it's bringing to the Middle East there, it's a little causing some concerns there. All that said, the toppling of Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian regime there is a body blow, as you mentioned, to Iran and to Russia as well, because those are two key allies and financial backers of Assad. So it's really a punch in the gut for them too.
We've been speaking with Matt Smith, energy analyst for Kepler. Matt, thanks again.
Thanks, Laura.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Oncology, right here with cancer care at more than 280 locations around Texas, allowing patients to remain close to family, friends, and caregivers while they fight against cancer. More at texasoncology.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. New U.S. citizens in Dallas say they're relieved to have protections as anti-immigrant rhetoric ramps up at both the federal and state level. But as KERA's Priscilla Rice reports, one couple now finds themselves of mixed status.
You're now citizens of the United States of America.
Francisco Correas Arevalo was one of 30 new citizens who took the oath last week at a ceremony at Dallas City Hall. Originally from El Salvador, he says it took him 34 years to get here.
Siento como que me quité un peso como una carga que tenía y fue un largo camino.
He says he feels as if a weight has been lifted off his shoulders and the long journey was worth the effort. But his wife, Sheila Perez, is still in the process of becoming a legal resident. She says she's worried about undocumented immigrants like herself who are trying to become citizens but might not have a pathway to get there. I'm Priscilla Rice in Dallas.
It's the holidays, which for many means traveling to visit family or friends. Those flying out of Central Texas may be spending time at the beginning and ends of those journeys at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. The team behind KUT's 24 Hours in Austin podcast spent a full day and night at the airport, documenting what it sounds like. KUT's Greta Diaz-Gonzalez Vasquez met a man who was there to pick up some precious canine cargo, a 1-year-old German Shepherd from Europe, and he has big plans for the pup.
She's coming from Slovakia, from a breeder friend of mine. She already took another dog that I used to have, that she wanted to breed, and I don't really breed dogs. I just have them to compete with, but that's it.
She's a competition dog. Mohammed is going to train her for a sport called Schutzhund.
Well, it's a bite sport.
Bite sport?
Bite?
Oh, bite.
Bite, yeah.
Okay.
The competition is basically a series of very difficult training routines that really shows that at this level the dog is pretty much precise. Like there's absolutely no mistakes.
What do they have to bite? Or...
Just a guy with a sleeve, an arm sleeve. It basically simulates different scenarios, like transporting a prisoner. It's a simulation. There's no prisoner, but there's a guy just in an arm sleeve, and he looks like he's being transported, tries to run away. The dog is immediately coming and has to grab him by the arm. Once he stops, the dog has to immediately let go of him, and he just has to kind of alarm, keeps barking until he tells the handler or the owner, hey, I'm just keeping him here. come over. It's very exciting, very interesting. My dream was to do this and maybe one day go to the World Championships. It's an impossible dream, yeah, but it's the reason why it's called a dream. Yeah. Dog? Yes. Yeah.
Hi. I'm with just, yeah, that's fine. Just move over.
Mohammed gets the paperwork dealt with, and it's off to Terminal T to pick up the dog. On the way, he talks about his personal life.
I don't know much people here in real life. Everyone that I know is mostly online. So most of my friends are Eastern European. So like I know a lot of people online, but I don't know like maybe 2 or 3 people in real life. In here at least.
You don't go out with
No, I go out. It's just like I don't drink. I have very limited interest in things. My interests are not the same as a regular person. I have Asperger's, so it's for me. It's just it has to be something. It has to be something very specific, and I don't. I can't just get along with a lot of people because I usually don't like to talk in general. Like me talking in here. I mean, I would not do it, but it's not really annoying to me or anything. But in general, I really don't like to talk that much. The best thing that I have the dog is that she doesn't have to talk.
4:45, Greta and Mohammed get in his car to go to the cargo terminal.
I'm kind of confused with that. I've never actually took a vacation before at work till the time they just literally had to force me to leave.
Where did you go?
Nowhere, just home. I don't know what people do for fun. It has always just been me sitting on a computer doing something or trying to figure out something or trying to crack something. So I really don't know what mostly people do for fun. So that's what I've been trying to do, just something else other than computers and get to experience life more.
Around 5 p.m., they get to the terminal.
We're getting off the car. There's a lot of trailers, and it seems like a loading dock. And there's a bunch of Amazon trailers and some cars. Does this dog have a name?
Yeah, her name is kind of funny. Her name is Pamela. Pamela Anderson Midolik. That's the name of the breeder's kennel. So that's the name.
They go inside, but Greta gets kicked out because she's got this big microphone.
Can I be out here? Yeah, you can do it outside. Thank you.
So she peers through the window.
You can tell Mohammed is really... Oh, they're opening the door. It's a huge kennel. They're opening the kennel, and Mohammed is putting the leash on Pamela. Or he's trying, but Pamela is going back into the kennel. I can barely see her. Oh, she's out. And she kind of wanted to escape. He put the leash on her. She looks pretty scared. Now she's sniffing around the room. Okay, they're coming out. Yay, this is Pamela.
Skittish, or just because, of the flight and everything, it's pretty hectic for them. So having to go on a plane, and it's pretty uncomfortable for them. So today she's gonna have a hard time, she's in a totally new place, totally different person. Come on.
Pamela is in her.
Good girl, good Pamela. I wanted to always do to camp or something like that. But it gets boring because it's just like it's me. It's more fun if there's somebody else, but I don't know anybody else. So I try to find something that I like to do, which is go somewhere and walk or do something with the dog. That's why the dog is perfect, because she doesn't complain of what we're going to do.
You can hear more 24 Hours in Austin wherever you listen to podcasts. And speaking of podcasts, another reminder that if you're traveling for the holidays or your schedule changes for any reason, you don't have to worry about missing out on the Texas Standard. We're available wherever you are on your favorite podcast service. More Texas Standard just ahead.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Raise Your Hand Texas, working to strengthen public education for all students and helping Texans understand education issues, coming up during the 89th legislative session at raiseyourhandtexas.org. Support for Texas Standard comes from the Texas Department of Agriculture, showcasing wild-caught Texas shrimp, sustainably and ethically sourced from Texas's own backyard. Texas Gulf shrimp varieties and recipes at wildcaughttxshrimp.com.
Hey, this is Gabrielle Munoz, Managing Editor for the Texas Standard. One thing I love about our show is that no matter where you spend your time online, the Standard is there for you. Whether you're reading full stories at texasstandard.org, sharing your thoughts with us on Instagram, Facebook, or Reddit, or listening to full episodes on YouTube. I don't always get to listen to the show when it airs, but I know that I can catch up anytime online when it's convenient for me, and so can you. Listen to the Texas Standard wherever you get your podcasts.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. When the Texas legislature banned puberty blockers and hormone therapy for minors in 2023, the focus was on trans teenagers. This law was one of several geared toward restricting access to trans youth. Another law that passed during the same session banned trans college athletes from participating in sports teams that align with their gender identity. Texas's ban on transition-related health care for minors went into effect last September. At the time, Texas was one of 18 states that banned this type of health care. Just a year later, that number was up to 26 states, according to the Human Rights Campaign. But despite the fact that there's no law curtailing access to hormone therapy for those over 18, trans adults report they are still struggling to find medical care. Here to tell us more, Eleanor Klibanoff, who covers women's health for the Texas Tribune. Eleanor, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Why is this happening? Why are trans adults being affected by a law specifically targeting minors?
There's already a dearth of providers in Texas who provide gender-affirming care, medical transition to trans people, adults or teens. And so when these laws went into effect, restricting the care that doctors could provide to teens, some of those doctors also had adult clients, and some just left proactively, sort of worried about the impact of this, increased hostility towards the medical care that they provide. So, we heard from several people, one of whom is profiled in this story, that suddenly they were impacted by this. They lost their doctor. There were long wait lists to try to get a new provider, and it just sort of wreaked havoc on an already pretty thin system.
Yeah, are you referring to Colin Zico, who is featured in your story?
Yes, Colin Zico spoke with us about his experience. He's a transmasculine person who is an adult and had transitioned and was taking hormone therapy. His doctors were at Dell Children's, and they left actually even before the ban went into effect as a result of an investigation by Attorney General Ken Paxton.
There's a case before the U.S. Supreme Court out of Tennessee about a similar law restricting this sort of care for minors. How might the outcome of that case affect Texas?
That case could really impact Texas. I mean, on the one hand, it will certainly weigh in on whether or not our law will survive any future legal challenges. It also, if the justices uphold the Tennessee law and say that it is good law, many groups are anticipating that will be seen as sort of a green light to further restrict trans people's access to healthcare and non-discrimination protection. So it may sort of dictate how far Texas goes on this issue going forward.
You write that Planned Parenthood has stepped in to fill healthcare gaps for trans patients. Any sense of how that demand has changed since the imposition of this Texas law?
I talked with Planned Parenthood South Texas, and they said that they have seen demand for their gender-affirming care services quadruple since 2018. And some of that is just because, more people are coming out, more people are seeking those services. Some of that is because people are losing their providers and finding Planned Parenthood. But they're certainly seeing an impact of all of these changes all at once.
We've been speaking with Eleanor Klibanoff, who covers women's health for the Texas Tribune. We're going to have links to her latest reporting at texasstandard.org. Eleanor, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Okie doke, let's go back to Wells Dunbar, who's been monitoring the talk of Texas online on this Monday. Welcome back, Wells.
Howdy, David. Good to be back. We were talking about it earlier in the program, the stunning story out of Syria, where lots of reactions are coming in about this story. The New York Times reporting the latest, the rebels that ended the Assad family rule beginning to assert control over the capital. But as we heard earlier in the program, lots of questions about how all this is going to work, especially the governance, etc. Gene Itzkowitz on our Facebook page says he's curious how this whole Syrian deal is going to shake out. Jimmy Kelly with an interesting perspective here. He says, I do wish that President Obama had taken more concrete actions to remove Assad from power way back in 2012, but I also don't really want our nation to be involved there. Jerry Harp, not as optimistic. He says one murderous regime is being exchanged for another one, greed and religion being the motivation. Meanwhile, Laura Cohen on our Facebook page also expresses her hope for the situation in Syria. So an incredibly fast-moving, developing story that we'll continue to closely track here on the Standard and this public radio station. Yeah, lots of moving parts there. Well, speaking of international events, the whole situation in Syria is going to be one awaiting future President-elect Donald Trump. Lots of folks chiming in about what his economic policies will mean for folks here in Texas. Fred Guerrera on our Facebook page asks, is my Mexican beer going to cost more from Trump's tariffs? Meanwhile, John Nielsen says he's trying to plan business going forward under the prospects of tariffs. Of course, President-elect Trump making that tariff talk a huge part of his campaigning there earlier this year. And so what that's going to look like internationally, heck, we've been talking about Syria. We've been talking about the situation with the oil, with OPEC and Saudi Arabia and their stuff. So yeah, lots of different moving parts there. Closer back to home, an interesting story that's kind of been flying under the radar here in Texas that a couple of our friends and listeners are pointing out. Sabrina Skiles via Facebook cites her continued inability to pay my water bill through the city of Odessa. J.A. Bro is also chiming in on this one. He says that the city of Odessa says it's the target of a cyber attack for the last 2 weeks. Yeah. Does this suggest something more devastating like a ransomware attack? We're still getting pretty scant details. Well, there has been some reporting on the situation. Apparently, the city of Odessa still working to get back online after what they characterized as a cyber incident back on November 21st. This per some reporting from the San Antonio Express News. And so it's been almost 3 weeks since that initial attack. They were looking to get those city bill pay services and whatnot back online, but as we see from our friends here on the ground, looks like all the bugs aren't worked out there. But again, let's take it back internationally, and we have seen these smaller and mid-sized cities be targets of these international cyber attack rings. So interesting story developing there in Odessa, and hopefully they're getting a stronger handle on it as the week begins here, David.
Yes, certainly do hope so. Of course, Wells Dunbar is going to continue to monitor the talk of Texas throughout the day, and we encourage you to message us with what's making news in your part of the Lone Star State. But we're out of time for today's big broadcast. You can keep up with the news 24/7 at texasstandard.org. Our producers and reporters include Sarah Ash, Shelley Brisbane, Kristen Cabrera, Alexandra Hart, Michael Marks, and Sean Saldana. Raul Alonso is our digital producer. Leah Scarpelli is our director. Kristen Cabrera taking the reins today. Casey Cheek is our technical director. We'll be back here tomorrow, and we hope you can join us.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.